hard to believe that it's been 20 years. I remember, just like everybody else remembers. I remember being in my office shortly before 9 a.m. and getting a phone call from our fire chief that said, "You have the TV on. Look at what's happening." We both looked at that screen. We saw a hole in the side of a building. There was commentary that said a small plane might have hit the tower. The chief and I looked at each other and said, "There's no way that a small plane would cause that big a hole." And as we were talking, the second plane went into the other tower. I remember fear. I remember stress. I remember anxiety. I remember thinking, I can't believe that the tools that we use to derive our livelihood, to move people, families, business folks, all around the world, was just used as a weapon of mass destruction. And thousands of people lost their lives, and countless more were forever changed. So each year we do vow, and we mean it to the core of our hearts, we will never forget. It is a time to remember. We'll do it for the 20th year, the 21st, the 22nd, and every year after that. We have to. Not doing so would be an insult to those that we lost. It saddens me, but I know that we have gone forward, tried to make our profession safer, and we will keep those that we lost in our hearts forever.
Greetings from Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport. My name is Laura Appleton, TSA Administrative Assistant to Mission Support. The creation of 9/11 Memorial started as a challenge during a morning briefing when I was an officer. As a New Yorker and a proud American, the challenge was my opportunity to honor those who perished and remind officers of our role and mission on which this agency was founded. After countless phone calls, meetings, and team effort, I was able to obtain the artifacts displayed. A fragment of the World Trade Center, donated by Customs and Border Protection Officer Marco Galliano on behalf of Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. An American flag donated by Lieutenant Colonel Michael Jansen of the U.S. Air Force, and a helmet from the New York City firemen who took part in the World Trade Center effort recovery. I invite you to visit the 9/11 Memorial site located at Terminal 1 Baggage Claim in Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport. Thank you.
On September 11, 2001, I was at the Broward County Emergency Operations Center. I remember feeling such a sense of hopelessness and sadness about the attacks on U.S. soil. But I also remember the unity and the love that came out of that terrible, terrible tragedy. I hope that we as a nation will never forget September 11th, Patriot Day. And on this 20th anniversary, more than ever, we remember to be united in our love for the USA.
There was a personal friend of mine that he retired from TWA, and then he started to work at a firm that had an office in the World Trade Center in the first tower. And he was there on that day, 9/11, and he did succumb to the attack. And the first thing I did after they had the memorial up and everything, I went there. The memorial is really something to see if you go there. We went through the whole memorial museum, and then we went out to the tower that he was at. I found his name and made a paper copy of it. And to this day, every time I go down there, I always go down there and touch his name on the stone there at World Trade Center.
I was actually downtown when the planes actually hit the towers, working for a construction company named Turner Construction. The first plane hit, I did not see the first plane. The second plane actually saw it when it hit the towers. We had to secure the site. People were coming through the site. There was a lot of fatalities. I actually saw people falling off the building. We vacated the building, actually we vacated the construction site actually after the first tower came down. We headed north up pretty much to Midtown, and that's when I saw the second tower that came down also.
In the meanwhile, my wife was on tower number 7, and she was able to escape before the tower collapsed in the afternoon. So you imagine the tragedy, and afterwards we moved from New York here to Florida. find a better place and maybe peaceful way to stay.
I remember 9/11 when I was 5. There's bits and pieces which I didn't realize at the time, but mostly I remember receiving a soldier doll from ABC Catalog, which had an American flag on it the morning of 9/11. About an hour later, after I opened the box, the first plane hit the World Trade Center, and at first I thought it was an accident, and then a couple minutes later, the second one hit. And at the time, I've never experienced an attack on our country. After 9/11, it really unified us as a nation because our home turf was attacked.
I used to work 2 blocks away from the towers, so I was on my way to work that day. And by the time I got there, trying to get to the office, it was already the 2 planes had hit the towers. Of course, as many, we saw the horror and we experienced something that nobody ever had experienced before. I'm very grateful to be alive. I'm very grateful to be here. It changed the perspective on all the things I do from that point on.
On September 11th, I lived in Washington, D.C. I worked for a government contractor there. I was a program manager and had several security contracts and IT contracts for different government agencies, and one of the contracts that we had was with the Pentagon. We had individuals that were there that were laying cable for networks and other things, and so I remember that day when I came in to work. I went downstairs to get a cup of coffee in the lobby area, and they had a bank of televisions there, and I saw on the television that they had smoke coming out of a large building in New York, and so I started to watch and see, and people were gathering around, and everybody was really starting to get concerned over it. And then we saw the other tower get hit by the plane, and then after that, we all were dispersed and we went back upstairs, and then within 30 minutes after that, the Pentagon got hit by Flight 77, around 9:30 or so. And I just remember spending the rest of that day trying to get a hold of employees to make sure that we were not going to have to call anyone that worked for us and tell them that their family had perished while they were working at the Pentagon. The cell phone towers went out. It became very difficult for us to get a hold of anyone. And I remember for the next couple of days going home and being able to see the smoke coming out of the fires that they couldn't put out within the Pentagon. And for me, it not only changed my career trajectory in a lot of ways, because I ended up becoming a federal employee and dedicating myself to working toward Homeland Security aspects, but beyond that, I think personally it changed me. It was something that really shocks your system. As an American, you don't expect that sort of thing, an attack on the homeland, and so for me, it really was a personal change as well in the way that I confronted things and the way I went about my life and the way I sort of dedicated myself to take advantage of the things that I had around me, because it was an uncertainty that you didn't know what was going to occur after that. And so, even living through the DC sniper event that occurred and some of the other things, I think, that was probably the most shocking thing that I've ever gone through in my life, and it had a big impact on the way that I approach everything.
What image from the 9/11 tragedy do I remember most, and why? I remember watching the news station, and after the first plane hit, the news station was covering that entire image, and then we witnessed the second plane hit the second building. I remember seeing the smoke coming out of the buildings, the people in the buildings jumping out of the windows to try to survive that. And I remember that the most because you can hear the bodies just falling out of the buildings.
On 9/11, 2001, I was at a country club where I worked, watching the big screen TVs when I came in, and the commotion surrounding the TVs, people saying that it looks like a small plane hit the towers. So I watched the new coverage, and being from New York, it seems serious to me. People were taking it as a joke. Oh, it's just another fake story. And while I was watching, live on TV, we saw the plane hit the tower. On 9/11, my brother-in-law and my nephew were out on the Hudson in a boat. My sister-in-law and their mother was in the city. When the towers were hit, there was no communication, none whatsoever. We couldn't find out any news as to what happened, and I was glued to the TV. I was devastated, and I've never seen anything so horrible as when I started seeing the people jumping from the top, holding their hands, knowing that they were going to die, and just wanted somebody to hold their hand while I went down. By the grace of God, I didn't lose family members in that attack. But the devastation that you have when you grew up and watched the majestic skyline all your life to be decimated by people that hate America.
9/11 had a profound impact on me because I was born and raised in New York. I was working at the time up in Boca Raton. I was on Congress Avenue and Yamato Road working for Bell South Mobility when a colleague came into the office and said there's been a tragic accident in New York City. They said a plane had crashed into the World Trade Center. I immediately took my headset off and I ran into the break room to see what was going on. My boss at the time ran with me into the break room, and we stood there, and we both turned to each other as the second plane hit the tower and said, "Oh my God, we're under a terrorist attack." I lost 26 family, friends, and colleagues that day. I worked in the World Trade Center at one point in my life, in the coffee and cocoa exchange. When they created the agency TSA, I decided I wanted to give back. I wanted to represent the people we lost that day. And I wanted to send a loud, clear message to those who took part in that attack. And that message was, when the going gets tough, we get tougher. And as a nation, we rose up and we stood up and we fought back and made sure we never had another 9/11 again.
During the time, the airport's public information officer was on vacation. So I was the assistant public information officer at the time and had to field the media inquiries. So, I mean, every day it was a story. What's going on at the airport? When's the next flight coming in? What's this doing? What's that doing? So it was constantly immersed in the activity. There was no getting away from it. And so 3 days later, the first flight came in. It was US Air. I think it was from Washington National. I'm not sure, but it was a US Air flight. And I had to escort the media to the gate. And so this was the first airplane that arrived 3 days later. It was pretty emotional not only for the people watching, me in particular, people on board. It was just so surreal that the airport had been closed for 3 days, basically nobody in the building. More empty than it was after the COVID thing, because there were still a few folks here and there, but after 9/11, nobody until this one flight came in. So it was a pretty intense experience. Every year now we have the 9/11 Memorial, and I think I myself come out and you see the beautiful structure behind us. So I think it's important to maintain the sense of nationalism and the unity that the event provides on an annual basis, and hopefully it will continue to go into the future.
Remember, in our offices, discussing some different topics with some coworkers when we heard rumor around talk in the office of a tragic aircraft accident in New York, that an aircraft had hit one of the World Trade Towers. So we immediately had put on the television in our conference room to find out what's going on. We've had aircraft accidents in the past, and we were really concerned about hearing something like this. We were in there watching it and trying to process what's going on and hearing all the different stories. When at that time we saw the second aircraft hit the tower. At that time then we knew something was different. This was not an accident, what we normally see when you see more than one aircraft happen, and our thought process that something else is going on. All along the time, also trying to process what was happening, watching the towers fall, and the loss of life was very, very difficult.
I was born in New York, and on 9/11, I actually had watched the towers being built in the 70s, so it was very hard. I just remember watching some of the horrific scenes and thinking that we as a nation cannot allow this to happen, and watching as people came together to try and help each other get home, find loved ones, and now as every 911 comes around, our family makes a point to get together, to call, and to try and reach out to those that we know have no family left. It was a very touching day for me, having grown up in New York, and I just wish and hope and pray it never happens again.
On September 2001, we all went through experience. I remember being at home and receiving that phone call. Just like most of us, we went into a change in life, what was taking place. That day, we went from a before and after. I remember seeing and watching with horror what took place, the lives that were lost, and facing something that we haven't faced before as a nation. I remember actually praying and getting really moved. You know, a lot of feelings, sentiments. And then as the day progressed and as the events unfold and the weeks or the week went by, and we saw the recovery aspect, and we started seeing the hundreds and thousands of rescue personnel and volunteers that came to help and to restore life to a normalcy and to fight for getting back up. That aspect I never seen, experienced in my life, ended up experiencing it. It changed me in a personal way, like many. I realized how beautiful and wonderful is this nation, and how strong we are when we are together as one. We acted as one, and that actually stood the time. 20 years later, now we're looking back, and I realize 20 years older that when we are actually together, working as one person, one body, one soul, that we can overcome so many difficulties.
I was 16 at the time, and I was in 9th grade when this happened. And one of the things that I remember after 9/11 was it was a very scary time for everybody, because we didn't know what happened, how can this happen to us. But one of the things that was really touching to me, what happened with this country, is how through all the political, all the frustrations of the nations, all the different type of people here, we came together as a nation. And what I mean by that is it didn't matter what religion, what race you were, the whole nation as a whole came together under one flag, and it was very inspiring to see how people from different aspects of life here that were born here in America come together for a common cause.
When it happened, I was at home. I immediately went to pick my kids up from school and get them home, and then I came into work. I worked the overnight shift in operations during that time. So I was here every night, and it was scary. It was scary being at the airport. We had to search the planes, and so it was a tense time. I remember that quite distinctly. As an airline employee, again, with it affecting the airline so much, it was completely different than how I felt at home with my kids and trying to make them feel secure. So it was almost like playing two roles, but everyone pitched in. We really worked together as a team. We wanted to get things back to normal and back on track, which is what I think the country did.
On 9/11, I was home in New York, about 20 miles away from downtown. I remember watching on the news around 9 o'clock when the planes hit the towers, and just having a very confusing feeling as what had happened to our country, and as well as those who were downtown. Those who were familiar, in the morning rush hour, all the people that were crammed in the subways going in, and then having to come back, and then traveling around New York that day and seeing all the families that were affected, whether through people that were lost, firefighters or police officers who were going downtown. It was a tragic day, and my heart goes out to the families that lost loved ones. My hat goes off to the police department, the fire department, all those who were involved during the recovery efforts.
I was at the Stephen P. Clark Center at downtown Miami-Dade during 9/11, working in the building, and the plane went into the tower, and my colleague and I looked and went, oh wow, and then the second plane went into the tower, and we're like, wow, that is terrorism. And then we were alerted that the building was closed down, and we were to walk down 10 flights of stairs to exit the building. Luckily, we were only on the 5th floor. The control center for the Metro Mover, Metro Rail, and Metro Bus. Also, the commission chambers are housed there. Some folks had to walk down 25 floors, and when we got to the door, there was a 15-second delay to exit, and people were beginning to panic, but we exited and were told to go home. So I retrieved my family. We all rendezvoused back at our home, and lo and behold, things were never quite the same again. From that day forward, we always have ID badges now for access to our offices, and security was tightened from then forward.
And 9/11. 9/11 brings various memories to me. It was actually my second month in the aviation department, so I was a newbie. I was a new kid on the block. And as we watched in disbelief the planes go into the building, and we're looking at each other and go, this is not happening. I looked around the room, and there's not a dry eye in the room. And as we sat there, we were in awe and could not believe what was taking place. What 9/11 means to us is that we become resilient in tragedy. We become more together. We think more of each other. And as an aviation community, 9/11 has brought us very, very close to one another.
9/11, back 2001, started off as a regular work day for me. I was in the Navy, Senior Chief Petty Officer, stationed in Arlington, Virginia, right across the street from the Pentagon. We got to work on time, 7:30 in the morning. By 9 o'clock, we had heard that a plane had gone into a building up in New York. A couple of the folks ran down the hallway, and they caught it on TV and explained that we weren't sure what was going on. About a half an hour later, we had heard an airplane go over our building, and we were at the Navy Annex, and normally you don't have aircraft transiting that area. It's right next to the cemetery, Arlington Cemetery. And we then heard an explosion. It sounded like it was coming from the last building in our complex, which was where the boilers were. The fire alarm went off, we left the building, and down at the bottom of the stairs, a friend of mine was holding the door open, like you normally would do in a fire drill. And he was white as a ghost. And I asked him, "You okay?" And Jim said that he just saw a plane go into the Pentagon. Well, we ended up going down to local hospitals and taking inventory of all the military that were injured and brought to various hospitals. I was fortunate enough that we were able to record those names and get that back to our admiral and get that to the other service members. Terrible time. The next 3 days we spent doing search and rescue down at in the basement of the Pentagon, and that was business back to normal after that as much as we could be. I think it changed everybody's life, and I think it's so worthy that we reflect back on 9/11.
Hi, my name is James Jackson. I was the Airport Operations Supervisor and AOCC Supervisor here at Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport on 9/11. As the incident rolled out, I was actually invited back into the office by one of my staff and actually saw the second tower being struck by the aircraft. And from that point on, our calls into the airport multiplied by over 200 into the Airport Communications Center. It was a long 2 days. Flights stopped flying shortly after the event. So for 2 days we had no activities there, but the AOCC, the Airport Communications Center, continued to have calls throughout the entire time. So it was quite an event to try to wrap your hands around as the employees tried to compose themselves and still answer questions by the public.
My experience on 9/11 in year 2001, it was really sad. I was working in Miami as a customer service when I heard the sad news. We have a lot of family members and a lot of people coming into the airport asking for the situation. The experience that I have was like really impressive. I keep it in my heart until today. And the lesson that we got is that the union that we have between all the American families and trying to help the people that suffered in this tragedy.
I remember watching the event unfold on national television in disbelief like the rest of the world. I grew up in New York City and watched the Twin Towers as they were being built in the 1960s and early 70s. And 20 years ago, I watched those same buildings destroyed by terrorists. Today, we have an obligation to remember those innocent souls who lost their lives and the dedicated first responders who helped save so many people while risking their own lives. So many lives were destroyed or changed forever, but the will of the American people lives on and can never be destroyed.